Hello everyone. So today our team has come up with a presentation on the Apalachicola, Chattahoochee, Flint River Basin, which will now be referred to as the ACF River Basin, and its effects on the oyster population in Apalachicola Bay. My name is Santos-Santiago, and my team members are Lindsay Furr, Adriana Hopkins, and Yuting Fu. So just to give a little bit of background on the ACF River Basin, I'll be talking about its size, the layout of the basin, as well as some history that will be important as we talk about the upcoming issues through the DIPSR model. So the ACF River Basin covers almost 20,000 square miles and spans across Alabama, Georgia, and northwestern Florida. And the drainage from the Chattahoochee River and the Flint River form the Apalachicola River. And this river flows into the Apalachicola Bay, which then empties out into the Gulf of Mexico. So if we look at this map here, we'll see that on the right side is the Flint River Basin in the yellow, with the river running right through it, more towards the right-hand side. And in the green on the left, we have the Chattahoochee River Basin with its river flowing directly in the middle. And down in that bottom third of the basin that's kind of carved out by the black boundaries is the Apalachicola River Basin and its river. And there at the very bottom, you see the bay and it emptying out into the Gulf of Mexico. And that area right there in the red is Atlanta, Georgia, to kind of give some perspective on where that lies on this basin. So in 1939, the Army Corps of Engineers planned 12 dams and reservoirs that would minimize flooding, provide sufficient water, unimpeded navigation, and more. And this plan fueled the development of the ACF River Basin and all of the communities that were and are affected by it. One of these areas is clearly the Apalachicola Bay, and over the years, it has become a major fishing community for Florida. The estuary's low salinity levels and geologic features, such as its hard bottoms, make it a prime location for oyster harvesting. And the resilience of the Apalachicola Bay is of increased importance due to the reduced oyster availability in other parts of the United States, especially after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in 2010.
The ACF Basin drains near 20,000 square miles in parts of Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, and covers 60 counties in Georgia, 10 counties in Alabama, and 8 counties in Florida. Increasing population growth and agricultural production from the 1970s to 2010 has prompted increases in water resources development and significantly increased water demand in the basin. Water resources in the ACF Basin have been managed to serve a variety of purposes, some of which include navigation, hydroelectric power, flood risk management, water supply, water quality, and recreation. These water resources also provide important habitat for fish and wildlife. The ACF Basin rivers and lakes are a major source of water supply used in the region. Most of the population in the metropolitan Atlanta, Georgia area is dependent upon surface water from the Chattahoochee River for their drinking water supply, as represented by the diagram in the middle of the slide. According to an environmental impact report of the basin in 2015 by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the northern part of the basin withdraws surface water in the amounts of 300 to 400 million gallons per day, with the majority of the water being used for public supply and thermoelectric power. Municipal and industrial use is the primary water demand along the middle and lower Chattahoochee River, and agricultural use is the primary demand for water along the Flint River. Other water use demands in the basin include water dilution, wastewater dilution, fish and wildlife propagation, hydropower generation, and recreational boating and fishing that is popular downstream in the Apalachicola area. Due to high water usage in the northern part of the basin, as well as periodic droughts, it has resulted in lower flows of fresh water to the Apalachicola Bay. Downstream communities in the ACF Basin, like Apalachicola's oyster industry, experience the pressures put on freshwater sources by population growth and land use changes. Population in the southern states has increased dramatically since the 1940s. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the population in the ACF Basin in 2012 was near 7 million people. The population has more than doubled in the region over the past 50 years. About 75% of the population in the ACF Basin resides in Chattahoochee River Basin, 20% in the Flint River Basin, and 5% in the Apalachicola River Basin. The major land cover uses are categorized as beaches, dunes, mud, water, developed land, barren land, forested land, golf courses, agriculture, and wetlands, as seen in the diagram to the right. According to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Environmental Impact Study in October of 2015, forested land is the predominant land use in the ACF Basin, accounting for more than 6.2 million acres, or about 48% of land use. Pasture and row crops is the second most predominant land use in the ACF Basin, accounting for about 2.8 million acres, or 21% of land use. Developed land accounts for more than 1.4 million acres, or almost 11% of the ACF Basin. The largest developed areas in the basin are the metropolitan area of Atlanta, Georgia, near the Chattahoochee River, and the northern part of the ACF Basin. Columbus, Georgia, which is the third largest city in Georgia, along the Chattahoochee River in the central portion of the basin. And Albany, Georgia, the largest city on the Flint River in the southeastern portion of the basin.
So now we are going to look at the state relating to the state or the quality of the water. The bay receives less water flow, causing drought to occur. This creates an increase in concentrations of pollutants, including salt. When the water becomes too saline for the oysters to tolerate, their population decreases. In addition to that, the higher concentrations of salt allows for oyster predator populations to expand. The same kind of thing happens with nutrients. Less water equals more concentrated amounts of nitrogen, phosphorus, and other nutrients. This leads to harmful algal blooms, which negatively affect the oyster population. Studies have been conducted that show that whenever these harmful blooms occur, the population crashes drastically. Furthermore, it allows for the spread of fatal diseases amongst the oyster population. So how does that affect the people and economy of Apalachicola? Over the past decade, the production of oysters has decreased by almost 80%. With the smaller influx of water and growing environmental and health concerns, oystermen have been forced to slow production. This area used to be a booming industry, once supplying 90% of Florida's oysters and 10% of the United States. Oystermen used to average 20 60-pound bags of oysters per day, which was also the daily limit set by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. A drought in 2007 and 2008 caused that average to fall to 12 to 13 bags a day. Over the next few years, production began to increase again, only to be struck by another drought in 2012 and 2013. Immediately following that drought, oystermen averaged 1 to 2 bags of oysters a day, but that has since risen to 4 or 5 bags. According to the FWC, Apalachicola does still supply 80% of Florida's oysters. However, the state production has decreased by 49% as compared to the previous 5-year averages.
More than 4 million people rely on Chattahoochee and the Flint River for drinking water. For decades, the job has brought congressional attention to an ongoing conflict among Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. The three states have been battling the allocation and management of water in the ACF River Basin across their borders. The dispute has involved several local, state, and federal agencies, as well as many courts and mediators. And the outcome is one of the most important environmental issues facing the region today. But each state has its own concern about the proper allocation of water. For Georgia, as the upstream user, the state wants to have enough water for growing need of Atlanta metro area's municipal and industrial water. So, according to the data of source of water in Metro Water District, Over 70% of Metro Atlanta depend on the water from Chattahoochee. So in addition to supply cities and heavy agricultural usage in the states, the problem is that Atlanta is not in the water-rich area of the state, and is sparrow across the top of multiple river system that drains into Atlantic Ocean and Gulf of Mexico. Alabama is concerned that Atlantic's ever-increasing thirst for water will severely limit its own use of water for agricultural use, power generation, municipal supply, fisheries, and other current and future use. For Florida, the most concern is the shellfish industry. The Apalachicola Bay produces 90% of the state's oysters. The oyster population depends on the brackish water to survive. Thus, the state wants enough fresh water to reach the Apalachicola Bay to sustain its $1 million shellfish industry, which is under severe ecological stress resulting from low river flow and high salinity water intrusion. The story is one example of the tragedy of the commons. The water right doctrines applying in these three states make a location particularly challenging. Georgia, Alabama, and Florida are like most eastern states, generally following a riparian water right doctrine, which permits those who by land border to access the water in a reasonable way. And also, when the water quantities are insufficient to meet all reasonable need, all users are going to reduce their usage proportionally. In contrast, most Western states follow a priority appropriation doctrine, which provides a superior rights to those who first put the water to use. When the quantities are insufficient to meet all needs, those with the superior rights receive their allocation first, and others receiving their share in order of priority. Because these three states follow the riparian rights doctrine, their relative rights to use the water are not determined by priority during drought, which is the challenge of the three states in successfully negotiating a water allocation compact. Unfortunately, the three states failed to make an agreement at the court. The Bay is a national treasure, and its demise was severely linked among our modern society, natural, and our heritage. To meet the demands of coming decades, there is an urgent need for more coordinated and adaptive water resource management.
So now we're going to look at management solutions for the state of Florida. So we've just talked about the issue using the Dipster model, and now we're going to break down possible solutions that the state of Florida hasn't heavily invested in. These are solutions that definitely have been presented to the state, but definitely could use a lot more attention, in my opinion. So the first one is the Sustainable Water Management Plan, and this plan was created by the Apalachicola Chattahoochee Flint River Basin stakeholders in 2015, and they used $1.7 million and put it towards research and coming up with a plan that used a holistic approach, an interdisciplinary way of viewing management. And this is important because the cost between the management plan and the litigation is just insane, from $1.7 million to $57 million. It's important to note that difference, and it's important to note that it's simply a lot more cost effective, and that steering away from litigation-focused efforts is definitely part of the solution for the state of Florida. And as you can see, that's listed further down in my slide. So that's extremely important. And an aspect of that plan that I wanted to highlight was the SWEET package for the United States Army Corps of Engineers. So this SWEET package uses adaptive management to handle the freshwater intake from the basin to the bay. So if anyone has a water engineering background and is interested in the more specifics of this SWEET package, I'll just kind of run through them very quickly. They're geared towards improving the operations of the federal reservoirs on the Chattahoochee River. And the first one is raising the winter pool rule curve at West Point Lake about 10 feet defining new zones that coincide with the Army Corps Reservoir recreational impact zones, and then only releasing water from an upstream reservoir when the downstream reservoir is in a lower zone. Adjusting hydropower requirements to achieve more flexibility, and providing 2 pulsed water releases in Chattahoochee, Florida for 2 weeks, each, one in May and one in July. So that's a little more specific detail on that sweep package that was mentioned in the management plan. Another solution that is not so much focused on the intake of fresh water in the basin is how oysters are harvested in the bay. So using oyster leases instead of open access fisheries, or having more of a balance of both. And these oyster leases would use the TURF framework, which stands for Territorial User Rights Fisheries. And it would make, or it can make, oystermen more inclined to promote restoration activities in the area, because they would be able to own a share of the fishery that they could then manage and harvest within. And an outcome of this oyster leasing approach is growth of aquaculture. And aquaculture is something that's being more and more researched as the years pass. So the future is very bright, and we can definitely see how through technological advances, aquaculture can become more of a profitable livelihood than open access fisheries. And as I mentioned, the steering away from litigation-focused efforts purely from a cost-effective point of view. And lastly, this is something that we can't, or should I say the state of Florida can't control, but in the upcoming years, we hope to see a reduction in the pressure on the bay, as the oil spill gets further into the past and research is further invested in. We hope that solutions are on the rise, and that these things are implemented, as well as other areas being used for oyster harvesting. So this slide wraps up our presentation, so I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask away.